All right, welcome everybody. Welcome everyone in here, everybody online. Thank you so much for coming to Cougars Care today. So hopefully that's what you meant to come to. If that's not where you mean to be right now, you probably leave. But not that we don't want you, but this is Cougars Care, so that's kind of what we're doing now. So let me take off my mask in case anybody wants to read my lips. I'm Nathaniel. I'm from the Counseling Center. I'm here to facilitate for you. Well, we will spend the next hour, hour and a half together, kind of working on becoming a better listener, which is our topic for the day. So as we go throughout the presentation today, you guys should feel free to, raise a hand or just, call out a question, anything that you want to know about. Happy to answer questions as we go throughout. Also, those of you that are online, Ray is manning the chat here, so she'll be able to monitor that for you. So if you need anything, put a question in the chat. You can also direct message. I think it's signed in as Nathaniel Fernandez, so direct message Nathaniel and Ray will get back to you. Yeah, next slide, please. Today, hopefully, we're going to do, we have 4 different goals here that we'll go through. I'll try and make it as interactive as possible and not super boring. We're going to be learning about active listening. We're going to be learning about effective attending behaviors. Those are the nonverbal behaviors of communication. Then we're going to practice 3 techniques for listening well, which are paraphrasing, reflecting, and questioning. We're going to have a time in breakout sessions to actually try and practice some of those skills. Then we're going to do 2 techniques for empathic support, which will be the feel, felt, found, and the I care, I see, I want, I will. There shouldn't be anything too intense about today's workshop, but if for any reason, as you guys are talking in your groups, please give each other respect and respect everybody's differences of opinions. Somebody shares something personal, please agree to keep it personal. As I mentioned, only the lecture content's recorded today. Feel free to take a break and step away if you need to at any time. Those of you that are in the room, the bathrooms are literally right over there. So if you need to take a bathroom break, that's where they are. We'll also be discussing some mental health topics today. So those are in any way triggering to you, just take a break, go for a walk, whatever you need to do, take care of yourselves. And then finally, we're all coming at this at a different pace. Some of us are like senior psych majors here, and I might be like reviewing a lot of things you guys have heard about before. Others of us are like first year math majors or something like that. So we're all coming at this from a different perspective. So there are no dumb questions, and I encourage you to please ask as many questions as you can throughout the time today. Does that sound good to everybody? All right, great. So we'll start by talking about active listening. Bless you. So when we talk about active listening, you guys may know that like Trump, the guy's named Carl Rogers. He was like a big guy into this. But basically, when we're listening, most of the time when we're listening, we're not listening. We're actually thinking about what we're going to say next, right? How many of you have been at a social gathering or a party or something, and like everybody's getting introduced and like you're like third in line to be introduced? I never remember the names of the first 2 people that got introduced because I'm like so low-key scared about like what is my name and will I even remember it when they just and I said, okay, great. Now I can remember the names of the next couple of people that are going to get introduced. But there's no way I can remember those first few names, right? It's because I'm not actually listening, right? Because actually listening takes a lot of effort and energy. And that's why we're calling it active listening here. That was the reason why that term was chosen, to denote that it takes an active effort and it's not just a passive skill like we usually think of listening as. Next slide. So this is a definition from Rogers and Farson here. Active listening basically requires that we get inside the speaker, that we grasp from their point of view just what it is they are communicating to us from their point of view. More than that, we must convey to the speaker that we are seeing things from their point of view, right? You probably have had that experience of that one friend that like just gets you, right? Hopefully you've had that experience, maybe more than a couple times. And that's because somebody is really understanding what you're trying to say really deeply and accurately, and understanding the feeling that goes along with it and what your whole vibe on the process is of whatever story that they're telling, right? And that's active listening. That's not only seeing it from the other person's perspective, but conveying that you are seeing it from the other person's perspective. Next slide. So the challenge with active listening is sometimes they do this kind of a presentation and like, I don't know, like big fancy companies or something, or at leadership training courses or something like that, where they teach you active listening like it's a skill, like it's a tool in your toolbox. Like you should, know how to do calculus, know how to, do, I don't know, some other skill, and know how to active listen at people, right? But that's not really the original intent when Rogers was sort of laying out this theory. It's not really a technique we can pick up and use. There's techniques that you have to learn to be able to active listen to people. There's skills you need to know. But at a basic level, active listening comes from your heart, right? You have to actually care about what somebody else is saying to you to fully inhabit where they're coming from, to fully understand them, and to be able to communicate that back to them, right? And so we have to find a way when we're active listening to somebody to care, right? And so sometimes that's going to be easy, because sometimes you're talking to a friend, a loved one, a partner, right? And you actually care what they're talking about. Sometimes it will be hard because you're talking to a friend, a loved one, a partner, and you don't care what they're talking about, right? And so finding a way to drum up that empathy inside of you is the most basic portion of active listening. And I'm not really going to be able to teach you that, unfortunately, right now, because it's such an individualized skill. So, but I want you to remember that. And whenever you're trying to use any of these techniques that we're talking about today, remember that it starts there. Sound good, everybody? Okay. I think I've done enough outlining, explaining, opening it up. Let's get into those actual skills like I was talking about. So we'll start with attending behaviors. I have a bunch of handouts here. These are packets that go with all of the handouts that we're going to be talking about today. If you're on Zoom, we're going to send you a PDF of them. You guys have a message now? Oh, did I leave one for myself? Thank you very much. So attending behaviors are the basic behaviors that aren't even really like vocal behaviors, not really even talking, but these are the ways that you commit to listening to somebody non-verbally, basically. There's several different ones in here. Making eye contact, you see, is an important one, especially within specifically our Western American culture. Eye contact shows that you're listening and paying attention. Obviously, you don't want to be like creepy about it, just like kind of staring at somebody the whole time, right? But generally lean on the side of making more eye contact than less eye contact. You're also going to want to try and match somebody's mood, right? So this could be done in a lot of nonverbal ways, right? So if somebody's like really low energy and you come into a place really high energy, obviously they're not going to think that you're experiencing what they're experiencing and hearing what they're going through at that moment, right? So matching the general volume of a conversation. This is always something I have difficulty with. I talk very loudly all the time. You guys probably have already noticed this, so I apologize for that. But trying to hear where somebody else is talking and bring my volume in line with theirs. Bring my prosody in, the rate of my speech in line with theirs. If somebody's talking really fast because they're excited or they're worried or something, we match that rate of speech. Or if somebody's talking more slowly because either they're really calm or maybe they're really sad, right? We want to match these. I guess that's part of verbal behaviors, but it's not the words they're saying, it's the way that they're saying the words. The next is using vocalisms like and You guys will hear me say a lot today. I apologize for that. That's one of my challenges for sure. But you'll be amazed at how many times that sort of a non-committal grunting noise, if you will, is actually very useful in listening, right? Because when we're listening, we want to hear what the other person's saying, but we also want to communicate that we are still listening to them and that we're still paying attention. So, yeah, and these kinds of things, these are minimal encouragers to speak. They're not even sentences, they're not even words sometimes, but they show that you're still paying attention and that you're tracking along with what somebody else is giving to you. Finally, well, not finally, I got two more on the slide there. Body posture, good positioning, usually when you're talking to somebody, would be to face up to whoever you're talking to. Let me do this to the camera, because hi people on Zoom. Sort of square up to whoever you're talking to. You're making eye contact. I'm looking at the camera right here is what I'm pointing at. You would want to open up your posture so it's not really crossed or guarded, right? And you want to relax as much as you can, right? If a lot of times when you start thinking about all these techniques that I'm going to be talking to you today, it's almost going to feel less natural than usual. Like you might think, hey, I'm a really good listener, but then I started thinking about all those like listening things that Nathaniel told me about, that I turned into a bad listener. Like if you're a baseball player who suddenly starts thinking about their swing and you get the yips, right? Like that's kind of how this can go sometimes, right? So you want to make sure you're relaxing as much as possible and just kind of going with the flow, doing your best to use the tools that we talk about, but not losing sight of the fact that it's a conversation and that your main focus should be on the other person. And finally, idiosyncratic behaviors. Everybody has their own little tics that sometimes bother people, sometimes don't. I'm a counselor, and like when we were training to be counselors in my very first year, they made us do counseling with like actor clients, so they weren't like real clients, they were just pretending to be going through something. And then all of my classmates would sit on the other side of a one-way mirror and be like staring at me the whole time with like their notepads out and be like, oh, he's touched his hair like 6 times. What's he doing? Why does he keep bouncing his leg up and down? That's really annoying. What is that noise? That's like the 12th time he's made that noise today, right? And then I would get out of my simulated session. I'd walk into where everybody else was, and my teacher would say, okay, what feedback do we have for Nathaniel today? Everybody would pull out their red pens, tell me everything I did wrong, right? So that's a little much, right? Hopefully that's not a process you guys ever have to go through. It was quite intimidating. I made it through though. I survived, clearly. That was years ago now, and I'm here now. So, but those idiosyncratic behaviors, like if you're the person that bounces your leg all the time, right? Like if you're the person that constantly is picking at their nails or something like that, you know, all of these behaviors might be fine. They might not really be distracting, but sometimes if you do them quite a bit, they can start taking away from whatever conversation is going on. So you want to try your very best to limit those. And sometimes we say, I don't really know what weird behaviors I do when I'm talking to people. I think I'm pretty normal. Well, you are all normal, that's true. But how we define normal, basically, also, I mean, you all do something weird when you're talking to people, let's just be honest here. And you're not going to have the wonderful experience of getting graded by somebody on the other side of a one-way mirror. So the best way for you to figure out sometimes is to ask somebody that you really trust, like, hey, do I have any weird like habits or anything like that? Make sure it's somebody you trust so that they can give you good feedback about it. But that's one really good way to try and identify those if you're not really sure what they are for yourself. Any questions so far on attending behaviors? I just gave us a super crash course in all non-verbal communication pieces. Sound good to everybody? Okay, great. So I'm going to go into those 3 listening techniques now. And they're all going to be, again, you'll have a separate page for each of these in your packets. I'm going to start with questioning because it's the easiest one for you guys to get because we always ask a lot of questions, right? That's pretty much the very standard way that we interact with people and show that we're listening. We ask follow-up questions, right? And so it feels very natural for us. And in that way, we can end up overusing questions quite a bit. So I'm going to start off with questioning here. But when we get into our exercise in a minute, I want us to really think about how we can limit the amount of questions we ask, not eliminate them, but limit our questioning in favor of paraphrasing and reflection of feelings. So when we ask questions, though, the limited questions we do ask, we want to be very careful how we ask those questions, right? How many of you have heard of open-ended versus closed-ended questions before? Okay, a few hands. Okay, cool. So those of you that haven't, an open-ended question is a question that can't be answered with a yes or a no, versus a closed-ended question can't be answered with a yes or a no, right? So like, were you angry when that happened? Yes, no, right? How did you feel when that happened? Oh, I don't know. I was kind of I was kind of frustrated, but at the same time, I was kind of scared because I didn't really, I was kind of confused about what was happening. And then they said this, and then after that, this happened, right? When I ask a closed-ended question, I get a single word response and a conversation shuts down, right? When I ask an open-ended question, the conversation I get back is usually much more forthcoming, right? Because in order to answer that question, you have to use more than one word, and it hopefully helps keep the structure of the conversation going. Make sense? So unless you need like to lock down that really annoying friend, like, are we getting dinner tonight? What time are you going to be there? When are you getting to the party? Kind of thing. Unless you need very specific information like that, don't ask closed-ended questions, right? When you're trying to listen to somebody, be asking those open-ended kind of questions. Next slide. And so that's questions, right? But why do I say questions are sort of overused, right? The reason I say questions are sort of overused is because questions, more than anything, put you in charge of a conversation, right? Because if somebody is telling you a story, and then you ask them a question about a very particular part of that story, now we're talking about the thing you were interested in their story, right? Maybe not necessarily the thing they were interested in the story, right? You maybe have even had these experiences where you try to tell somebody a story and they get like way lost in like the details of like the opening of the story. And you're like, okay, so I was walking down the street and the cars were passing by, and then all of a sudden my friend, wait, let's go back to the cars for a second. What color was the car that was passing by you? And like what make and model or whatever. And you're like, totally not important to the story, absolutely a waste of everyone's time, right? And so that shows that you're not really actively listening to somebody, because you're not getting the position from where they're at in the conversation and communicating that that's what you're looking for, right? That's what Roger said you need to do to active listening. And so paraphrasing is an option that's on the very other end of the spectrum, right? Paraphrasing is the way that we can try our hardest to not drive a conversation in any direction while still showing that we're listening, right? And you probably have heard the term paraphrasing before from like, I don't know, whenever you're writing a paper, right? You got to paraphrase the article that you read so that you're not plagiarizing it, right? Paraphrasing means changing the words that you heard, but communicating the same exact meaning, right? And so when somebody says something to you, right, like they're saying, and I couldn't even believe how angry I was when he said that, because it was so disrespectful, and I couldn't believe that anyone would have like the sheer gall to say anything like that to me. I don't know, gall is a very outdated word, but pretend your friend said the word gall. And then you would say, yeah, how could he say that to you, right? And now I'm paraphrasing back what I just heard, but I didn't add anything to the conversation, right? All I did instead was show that I heard what they said, and then immediately back right back out of the conversation to let them keep going in whatever direction they want to be going in, right? Paraphrasing helps you reinforce your memory of what's going on. It helps you clarify, right? So if you paraphrase wrong and they're like, no, that's not what I said, they're like, okay, my bad, we can get right back on track, right? But when you do it right, you stay on the same page as the other person, and you don't steer the conversation at all. They maintain the full direction and flow of that conversation. Making sense? Okay, great. Some tips when we try and do this is to not really go beyond what was said to you, right? So don't put any guesses or anything in. I'm about to talk about reflection of feelings. That's where we have to throw guesses into our listening. But here we just stick with what was said and don't parrot it back the exact same way. Like, don't quote them back to themselves, because then that gets really awkward and you sound like a weird robot. Like, that's what happens when I do these trainings, like for leadership groups or something like that, or like CEOs, just like I was telling you before. When you try and use these skills as tools rather than use these skills coming from a genuine place of wanting to understand and listen, you get so many robots in the audience and it gets very annoying. So don't just repeat the words back, but paraphrase those, just like you were gonna be doing, writing a paper or something. And then finally, reflecting. You can get the next slide. Reflecting of emotions is kind of in the middle of those two things, right? It's less directive than a question because you don't want to be taking over a conversation, but it also gets to the heart of what's going on in a conversation, right? Because why is somebody talking to you? It's because they feel some kind of way, right? They feel really happy and they want to share that with you. They feel really worried and they need somebody they can depend on. They feel really sad and they need some encouragement. You know, whatever it is, whenever we're communicating with others, the reason why we're social creatures is to share our emotions and our experiences with one another, right? That's the purpose of communication. And so sometimes we get really lost in the details of an event or get very much just describing something, and we don't really hit the emotional core of it very well, right? But when we do hit the emotional core, that's when we feel really heard and understood. Like I was talking about before, that's what active listening is. It's when somebody really gets it from your point of view and really feels the way you feel about something, right? And so to accelerate that process, we can do what's called a reflection of feelings. It's very similar to a paraphrase because I'll be repeating back to somebody something very similar to what they said, but instead I'll throw in emotion words with it, right? So you can think about if you're having trouble actually imagining how this would look, you can use the general phrase, you feel blank because blank, right? So, you know, for example, some of the practice exercises on your handout here. I thought everything would be so much better when I came to college, but it hasn't been. I've been really down. I stay in my room. I let myself all the time. I can't stop crying. I don't know. It's been hard. I don't even know how to feel. I don't know. I would say something like, yeah, you feel really depressed because of all this loss of expectations or something like that, right? That wasn't a perfect one, but you see that I'm focused on the emotional feeling that the person's going for, rather than all the individual content that the person's talking to me about and all the different behaviors that show that they've been feeling depressed, right? And that cuts to the heart of the conversation, the reason for the conversation. This can be really hard, especially if we're the kind of people that have been trained all our lives to sort of run away from emotions. Again, that is a very sort of Western United States kind of attitude, is to not be super duper in touch with our emotions and especially not be super open and vulnerable with them. I don't like that. Clearly, I don't like that. I'm a counselor that works at a university that's doing a class on active listening and my hair looks like this. Like I clearly like feelings and I like talking to people. So I want to encourage you not to lean into that whole running from emotion thing. I want to encourage you to actually lean into emotion whenever you can, in terms of your paraphrases, in terms of your questions, and especially in terms of your reflection feeling, because that's going to communicate that you're listening to people far better than anything else will. And then finally, be tentative with your guesses sometimes. Sometimes you'll say, you must be really angry because she did that, right? And then somebody say, no, I'm not angry. I'm irritated a little bit. I'm frustrated, kind of, right? Because you maybe hit the right emotion, but you hit it too strong. You hit it too loud of a note, right? And so instead, you could say something like, so you feel angry because of what she did. With that little question mark at the end. You hear me like put in even though it's not a question, you hear me inflect a question into the end of my statement, right? And then that lets it be more tentative, and lets it be like, yeah, well, not angry as much as like irritated, right? You know, so instead they're agreeing with you in principle, rather than if you made it a much more definite statement, and then they'd be rejecting that statement, right? And that would show that you're not really getting them, not really vibing with them. Everybody good on those listening techniques? What questions do you guys have on those 3 listening techniques? Okay. No, you're good, right? Go ahead and switch to the next slide. All right, now we're to the heart of what we're doing. So that's a really good question. So in case you didn't hear it on the Zoom, the question was, so is this kind of all tailored to just understanding somebody versus actually helping them? And I would say yes, and is the answer to your question. So I really like it. Appreciate you asking that question. Yes, what we're starting with here with active listening is purely about meeting somebody where they're at, because you really can't help someone until you meet them where they're at, right? And if you never get it to begin with, if you never show that you're actively connecting with them, right, then when you try and help them out by, I don't know, taking them out to dinner to cheer them up, or, you know, going out somewhere, you know, grabbing coffee together, whatever it is that you're trying to do to cheer this person up, if they think you won't understand, that gesture will be very useful to them, right? And so that's why, like, we spend a long time on just meeting somebody where they're at and actively listening to them. And so from a Rogerian perspective, he believed in the self-actualizing tendency. This is starting to get into your psych classes a little bit, so zone out if you guys want to zone out on this. I promise I won't go too academic for too long. But he thought just by being listened to and being understood, you could get better in and of itself. And I do believe that happens sometimes. I do believe sometimes it just cheers us up to be known and heard, but not all the time, right? And so that's actually what the next section, when we talk about empathic support, the I feel found kind of things, that's where once we meet somebody where they're at, then we can give them a nudge in another direction, right, in terms of helping them out. So that's a great question. Stay tuned to my next slide, and hopefully that'll give some more. All right, great. So we're going to do the heart of this activity today, which is going to be a breakout group here. So Ray is going to put you guys in the breakout rooms online. Once you're in there, if you're able, please turn on your mics, turn on your cameras so that you guys can interact with each other. In here, we're going to get into groups of probably 3, 4 if you need to, but 3 would be the ideal number, just with who's ever around you. You guys can scoot around, whatever you need to do. But we're going to be doing a technique that's actually really common in some introduction to counseling style classes, and these are called clinical trios, right? Basically, you're going to have one person who is the volunteer actor, who's, in this case, going to be talking about something that makes them feel some kind of an emotion, right? So I encourage you, if you would like, to pick something that you're actually going through and actually experiencing an emotion about. Don't pick something that's overwhelming to you, right? Because that's not the whole point of this. I'm not trying to get us all overwhelmed and worked up right now. But pick something that makes you feel like a 6 or a 7 out of 10, right? Whether that's something that makes you pretty excited, something that makes you pretty scared, something that makes you pretty sad, something that makes you pretty frustrated, whatever. You don't have to use your own personal experience either. You can totally just make up an experience, pretend something, pick something that a friend has experienced and act that out. We're not asking you to put it all out on the line here. Do whatever makes you feel good. But that'll be the actor's position. The second position will be the listener, the active listener. And you're going to try and practice all 3 of these techniques, well, 4 of these techniques we just talked about, those nonverbal attending behaviors, those questions that are open-ended, those paraphrases that you use a lot to not direct the conversation, and those reflections of feelings where you get to the heart of the matter, right? That's going to be your goal. It's going to be a little bit awkward because you're just learning these skills, but we're going to try and do our best. And then the third person is going to be listening and watching, so that, you know, because you can always learn a little bit better sometimes from that passive place, right? When you're not actively doing it, you can watch how it's kind of going. So that'll be the 3 people, and then we'll rotate twice during it, right? So we'll have, everybody will do each role. You'll be an actor, you'll be a listener, and you'll be an observer. Sound good to everybody? Okay, so Ray, go ahead and open up those groups online. Everybody here get into groups of about 3, 3 at least, 4 at most, and we'll get started. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. I know engaging in those techniques is really hard and weird, especially when you're practicing new ones and you're trying to like figure it all out at once. Also, when you're sitting in a classroom with people you may not know very well. So thank you very much for engaging. Well, I hope you guys won't give up on these things entirely just because they were very challenging, but that's okay if you do still. But I want us to jump into the empathic support part of this presentation. So just like we were talking about before, when we want to help somebody out that's not doing well, we want to listen to them and meet them where they're at first, right? And so that's why we spent 50 minutes already just on that. And I'm going to spend the next 15 or so minutes on this directing the person where then they should go, right? that sort of the advice giving piece, right? Because I'm not sure if you've ever experienced this, but when somebody doesn't get how you're truly feeling or what's going on, and they swoop in and they give you some advice, or they explain a situation to you that they don't really understand, there's nothing that is more annoying than that. And there's no way that you're going to do what they tell you to do, right? And so that's why it's critical that we spend the majority of our time when we're trying to help somebody out by listening to them first, right? So one technique you could think about using is this feel, felt, found technique that we have here. So this is actually originally like a sales technique. So if you're ever like buying a used car or somebody's like coming as a door-to-door vacuum salesman, that job doesn't exist anymore, but if it were to, right? Somebody will often build connection with you first before they try and sell you on a course of action, right? And if you think about it, that's also what we're kind of doing when we're trying to give advice to our friends about ones, right? We're trying to build connection and then sell them on a course of action. So you start by using the word feel, so that you build empathy with the other party. You tell them that you understand how they feel. Felt, you tell them about someone, usually you, but can be somebody else as well, who has felt the same way. And then what they found was helpful in that situation, right? So you could say, you can see how this could be used in sales, right? Oh, I feel how frustrated you are by always having those dingy carpets, but I used to feel that way too until I felt like I could find another way, and I found this great vacuum thing I have now, and everything's great, right? Obviously, that's how you would use it in sales, but instead, if you were using it in a real situation, an emotional situation, right? Could you get the next slide? You would say something like this, right? Your friend's going through a bad breakup. You say, I feel how hurt you are by him breaking up with you. I felt so hurt after my last breakup too, and it seemed like nothing would help. But I found in the end that doing things with my friends to get my mind off it really helped. You want to go to the mall together, you want to go get some food or something, you want to get your mind off of it, right? And so you see that the 2/3 of it, the feel and the felt, are still in that empathic framework, and then the found is the turn at the end, which sells the advice, right? Make sense so far? Another way you could do it, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a little bit longer one for maybe a more involved conversation. Also doesn't have that nice snappy F to it, but I care, I see, I feel, I want, I will, right? Where you remind somebody that you care about them. You notice whatever concern that you're having. You name your own emotional response, the empathy that you're feeling for them as you listen to them. You say what you want, whatever your suggestion is or whatever your advice is. And then you state, I will, however, you will clearly support that advice, them taking that advice, how we will help them do that thing. So a little bit more abstract. Let me just show you an example so it makes more sense. So we're roommates and I care about you. I see that you've been really depressed recently and haven't even been able to leave the room in a while. I feel worried about you and I want you to get some help. I will be happy to walk with you over to the counseling center or the campus ministry office or whatever, right? So that we can find some help, right? This could be one of the most daunting things. If somebody really is going through a mental health crisis, reaching out and getting help can be one of the most challenging things. And that's why, again, you spend a lot of it on I care, I feel, right? And then not only do you don't end with the advice, right? You don't end with the want, but you end with how you will help them do that, right? To show that you're not saying like, oh, I want you to go away, right? I want you to go talk to somebody else about your problems, right? But rather, I will help you do that, right? And here's how I will help you do that, right? And so these are great examples, hopefully, of how we can build enough empathy and rapport through listening to frame a suggestion like this in a way that somebody will actually potentially act on it, even if whatever it is scary or difficult. Okay. Question over there.
Can you go back to the last slide? Or just like
This one? Yeah, perfect.
thank you.
Another question in the front? So again, to paraphrase the question for those of you online, if you can't hear it, is there some line where you're giving advice and it's always been sort of told not to give advice and that's not a great thing to sort of do? How do we walk that line? Is that about the question kind of? So yeah, exactly. Walking that line is difficult. Advice is typically not a super good thing to start off with because everybody's different, right? And so that's why like we started this with active listening, and a lot of times just actively listening to somebody and them being able to hear themselves talk it out. Sometimes they'll come up with solutions on their own, right? And so that's often really useful. But then you swing around to sort of the advice side of it when there is something that you think could be helpful to them, right? Like in the one example with just like, hey, let's go get ice cream because your boyfriend broke up with you or whatever, right? Like it can be something small level like that, all the way up to something big level, like, hey, like I'm really worried about you, like you should seek some professional help and I want to help you do that, right? Like, and there's obviously a big gap between ice cream and counselor, probably. Although I like ice cream. If anybody like wants to come see you for counseling, we can go get ice cream and then talk about feelings. That would be like a super fun session. But basically, even when I'm doing that, I'm trying to put it within an empathic framework. That's why I felt found, right? I say what I found was helpful to me as a suggestion, right? So I'm not saying like, you should do this, right? I'm saying I found that this was helpful and maybe that means it will be helpful for you too. I'm not putting myself in an expert position. I'm not putting myself in a one above kind of position. And so advice from a peer is different from command from an authority, right? Same thing with the I care, I see, I feel, I want, I will. The I will part is huge. That's why, even though this one's more complicated and longer, I kind of like this one better. It's easier to remember feel, felt, found, but I like this one a lot better because it shows how you'll continue to interact with somebody and how you'll continue to support them, right? Because say somebody like is really going through something and they need to talk to a counselor, or they need to like go report like a crime to the cops, or they need to go like to a doctor, to a hospital or something like that, right? You're not a counselor, you're not a doctor, you're not a law enforcement officer, right? You know, like maybe you are some of those things, but I would assume the majority of you aren't. So when you say that, when you recommend somebody bring in support in that way, following up with I will go with you, I will walk with you step by step, I will support you in this process as your friend, shows how connected and committed you are to this, and that shows the understanding and the empathy much better than saying like, you need to go see a therapist, right? Like, does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. Perfect. Any other thoughts or questions on this stuff? Okay, great. Next slide. So the last thing we're going to do here is a call to action. I'm not going to make you guys well, actually, you're sort of all still variously in your group. You guys don't need to move around, but just in whatever sort of group you're sitting by next to, answer these two questions for me. What is the most surprising thing that you learned today? And what is one thing that you're going to try and actually do out of all this amazing amount of stuff I just totally overwhelmed you guys by? And promise to each other one thing you're going to try to do, because psychology shows that if you say it out loud to another human being, you're going to be much more likely to try and actually do that than if you just sort of say it quietly to yourself. So get into groups real quick with who's ever right by you. What did you learn today, and what are you going to try and practice? On Zoom, I'm not going to put you back in the breakouts because it would like take forever. So like, go ahead and just talk to yourself up there. All right, let's bring it all back together as a group. Ray, if you can give me the next slide. I'm super excited for you all to live out those promises you guys made to each other and definitely practice all these skills. I'll be emailing all of you individually next week to check up on you. That's not true. I won't be doing that. I'm just trying to scare you real quick. If you ever want to talk more about this stuff, if you ever need counseling for any other reason too, or if a friend of yours does, I'm from the University Counseling Center, and this is the advertisement you get for the University Counseling Center today. As APU students, you all have 100% free, 100% confidential, 24/7 counseling services available to you. So if you want to come see us, we're right next to the health center in the Shire Mods, or you can give us a call at that phone number. If you guys want to take a picture of the number right now with your phones, that might be useful in case you need it in the future. If one exception, if you ever are feeling distressed, if you're ever feeling actively suicidal, or if you know somebody else that is, do call 911 first before calling our urgent care number, but that should be a very rare case. Again, thank you very much. I know we've been answering some questions. I'll continue to answer some questions, but if you could get to the last slide here. Oh, no, sorry, there's one more slide. We got 4 more of these left. If you want to deal with your depression, if you want to deal with your anxiety, if you want to become the best at solving conflicts and having great relationships, or if you want to be the coolest goal setter ever, come see us the next 4 Fridays. We'll be doing those. Go ahead. We are done for the day. Thank you very much, and feel free to head out. Thank you again.